Hey, Jayhawks fans, welcome in to the Hawks Nest presented by Casey Sports Company. I'm your host, Nolan Brooks, and I'm joined by a very special guest today, Keegan Russell from the Sports Authority podcast. Keegan, thank you for joining me today.
Yep, super excited. Glad to be here.
And we have a very fun episode ahead for you. Make sure to go check out last week's episode. We talked about KU football recruits for the 2024 signing class. Nothing official yet. They're not signed on paper, just verbal commits so far. But if they do, it's going to be a fun class. I dubbed it the greatest class of all time if it
It's a
happens.
monster class so far.
Exactly. It's looking like a very fun freshman class that could come in. So go like, subscribe, comment on that. Go check out all of our previous episodes. Go check out all of our other stuff on Casey Sports Company. Buy some merch, whatever you want to do. Spend some time on the website, whatever you want. All right. Well, speaking of fun stuff, today we have a fun episode for you. We are doing a top 10 men's basketball list for you, me and Keegan are. This might have been one of the most difficult things we've ever done, putting together a list like this, right, Keegan?
Absolutely. I told you this off air. KU fans are spoiled with tradition, and there's like 25 guys you could throw on a top 10 and make a case for. So this should be fun. We'll see how we do.
Absolutely. And just to specify here, this list that we're doing is not a top 10 personal favorites list. This is not a, oh, who did I enjoy watching or who did Keegan enjoy watching? This is a top 10 overall, just based off of what they did at KU. And another clarification, there's no one and dones on here. We're talking the journeymen here, the guys who were past maybe, I would say, 2-year cutoff would be the minimum. And then obviously the guys that went on and played a little bit more, the 3 to 4 year guys. I don't know if Mitch Lightfoot counts here because I do play like 8 years at KU. But we're talking the journeymen here on this list today. So buckle in. Let's just go ahead and get started with this here. I mean, start at number 10, Keegan. I really want to hear who you have before I give you my answer to make sure that I
Yeah.
got my information right.
So do we want to do these one at a time back and forth, or do you want to do?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So number 10, again, guys, this is incredibly difficult. I have about 5 names that I left off just outside the top 10. I'm going to throw those out to you first because then, as we're talking, if you want to make the case that I left a guy off, then by all means, let's get into it. So I'm going to give you my 5 names I put just outside the top 10. Um, Again, same thing like you said. Criteria was full total career accomplishments, stats, winning, all of that kind of combined. These are 5 guys that could easily be top 10, but for this sake, I left them just out. So here's my 5 just outside the top 10, and that is Keith Langford, Sharon Collins, Frank Mason, Aaron Miles, and Wayne Simeon. And I am already feeling the death stares, the daggers of Keegan, you're stupid. How could you leave Frank Mason off, National Player of the Year? How could you leave Sharon off? Again, you sit here, you can argue that they should be top 10. I have no problem with that. There's just only 10 guys that can go on the list, and that's how I did. So those are my guys I left off just outside outside the top 10.
Okay. And again, we sound like a broken record here, but this maybe KU, Duke, and North Carolina, it's impossible to pick a top 10 and not feel like you are just saying the wrong name, even though in reality you're not. It's a good pick here. So my 5 just outside, I'm going to go Xavier Henry, Sharon Collins, Brandon Rush, Wayne Simeon, and then let's see here. And then I also had Jalen Wilson. I actually put him on my just outside or my honorable mention list per se, just because Jalen making that national championship game and finally winning one, I think brought him into a new category. So that at least the honorable mention. So Those are our honorable mentions, but now we're going to actually get into the top 10 here. So, number 10, Keegan, who do you have?
So my number 10, and I changed this list up about 3 times in the last 24 hours. My number 10, I went with Drew Gooden. I think it is a safe bet that he is top 10 all time when you think of the talent and ability he had. Even in his shorter career, he was pretty dominant. And that 2002 national championship or that Final Four team, he was a big piece of that year's team, and he was dominant on the floor. So I think he has to be top 10. I originally had him, I think, slotted at 5 or 6 and then pulled him down a little bit. Again, I think outside of my top 3, I think 4 through 10 I would have no problem moving them around. But I do think Drew Gooden has to be top 10 in my opinion.
Okay. And again, I don't think you and I are going to disagree at any point during this. You could make several different lists here, so I love Drew Gooden there at 10. It's a safe pick. So for me, number 10, I actually do have Frank Mason. I know you had him in your honorable mentions. I
Yeah,
put
he'd
Frank
be
in
my
at
number
10.
11.
Oh, exactly. So I mean, consensus All-American player of the year. He did everything for KU and he did everything right. One of the best Bill Self products, I would say, at least in the last 5 years, even. That he is everything embodied at KU. So that's why I got him at 10. Just a safe bet, a good place to start, just because there's a lot of talent above him that makes a little bit more sense. So, number 10, I have Frank Mason and you have Drew Gooden. Let's move on to number 9 here. Who you got, Keegan?
So as you guys will notice, my list, there is a theme to it, and it's a lot of older players that may not have been in a Kansas uniform as of recent days. I'm very old school with KU basketball, and the history of former players runs super deep. So again, these are guys that I put on there because I think they were truly dominant in their time. So for me, number 9, and again, I think he could easily be higher. This is one of my all-time favorites, and that is former point guard Jock Vaughn from that monster 97 team. Number 2 all-time assist leader, Aaron Miles, beat him out a couple years later. But Jock Vaughn was my number 9. Again, I think when you think Kansas top 10 players of all time, in my opinion, there's no way Jock Vaughn's name is not on that list.
Okay. And Jock Vaughn, again, most of these guys we're going to name off here are picture perfect Kansas Jayhawks. And that's what makes it so fun. So Jacques Vaughn at 9 for you.
It's funny with Jock. My mom will
Mhm.
appreciate this. So shout out, mom, if you watch this later. When I was a kid, there were 2 players when I was real little, about 3 or 4, that I would run around saying I was them. So I had a Ryan
Yeah.
Robertson jersey when I was about 2 years old. Don't remember that at all. But when I was about 3 or 4, I would run around in my KU basketball jersey with my little mini goal in basketball, and I would just run around going, "I'm Jock Vaughn. I'm Jock Vaughn." So if we ever get into a list of favorite players, he's on my top 3 for sure. But I think that also for me solidifies, if I could identify with a player that much, then he's top 10 all time.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm kind of along the same boat with you here. I do not have Jacques at 9, but I do have Kirk Heinrich. Um, I'm a short guy. I play point guard a lot when I play basketball, so trying to identify with a college basketball player. And at the time, um, that was right when JJ Redick was kind of starting to come into fruition at Duke. And Kirk Heinrich, I feel like, was the template for JJ Redick in a way. Now JJ went on to be his own guy, but Kirk Heinrich I have at 9 just because he's 2-time All-American, 2 Final Four appearances while he was at KU. Just the picture perfect point guard. He might not have been the heavy scorer like Frank Mason was, but 12 points and 4.5 assists per game. He's doing what you need out of the guy to run the floor. He was the floor general without putting up 20 a game.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes him so great here.
Yeah, he's another one of those no doubters. Wherever you put him in the top 10, he's in the top 10 for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And so That's gonna be our number 9s here. So Kirk Heinrich for me, Jacques Vaughn here for you, Keegan. Who do you have at number 8?
So I actually went Captain Kirk, Mr. Kirk Heinrich
Okay.
at number 8. Again, one of my all-time favorites because that was right about my age of identifying with KU basketball and being old enough to understand a ton of it. So Kirk Heinrich was a ton of fun to watch. Tremendous shooter, scorer. He played with grit. He played with some a little bit of a cockiness to him, but he wasn't afraid to go up against anybody. And again, that 2003 national championship runner-up team, I think, is one of the most dominant teams KU's ever had. And they do not make it as far as they did without the gut and the grit of a guy like Kirk Heinrich playing through injuries down the stretch. And he just went out there and he balled all the time. So he's my number 8.
And again, perfectly fine. Put him anywhere you want here. At 8, I do have Drew Gooden. I know you had him at 10. I've got him a little higher up on my list here, but you really laid the groundwork already when you were with what you said about Gooden. Just a solid big man. He was Udoka Azubuike before Udoka was even a thought for KU. Way before the Jeff Withies, before the Thomas Robinsons. You had Drew Gooden, and he just embodied what a KU big man would eventually become. 15 points and 9 rebounds per game in all 3 years. That's a career average.
Yeah.
That's a double-double a night guy for you, and that was before Bill Self. Now Bill Self looks for that in every guy. So, again, Drew Gooden kind of laid a foundation there, playing under Roy Williams and that coaching staff before Bill got there. And so now that's a good spot for him. So I have Drew at 8, and you have Kirk Heinrich. Let's keep moving here. Number 7, who do you got?
So I'm going to roll the clock back a little further. Now, obviously, I cannot speak to this guy's game from watching him. But when you go in and look at guys' names up in the rafters, you look through the history books. I'm taking this one back to Darnell Valentine. He was one I had a very hard time of where do I place him because I didn't get to see him play. I just know from historic standpoint, he's got to be top 10. So maybe some of our little bit older audience that got to see him play can attest to that. But for me, Darnell Valentine, not only was he huge at Kansas, he was big once he took it to the next level at the NBA. And just, I think when you look at history of KU basketball, he's one that is going to be remembered as one of the most iconic, bigger picture KU basketball players. So he's my number 7.
Okay. And at number 7, I'm actually going to go with Rafe LaFrentz. 94 to 98, obviously. I'm in the same boat here. This is before me, but just based on the history writings on, the history books that talk about him and some of the highlights that you can go watch. Big 12 Player of the Year, 1997, 15 points, 8.5 rebounds per game across 4 years. Again, this is another All-American for KU that was just a crucial part of that late 90s or mid to late 90s run there for KU. This was a era where they're trying to kind of replicate that Danny Manning run, the Miracle Danny Manning team, and LaFrentz was a key part of that, along with Drew Gooden. And they actually got to they missed each other by a year. I couldn't imagine with LaFrentz and Gooden on the same team. That would have been unreal. But yeah, I'm gonna have to go with LaFrentz here at number 7.
I think that is solid. I do have him on my list just a little bit higher up, so we'll get into that later.
Okay. All right. So,
but yeah, no doubt he was dominant. I mean, he was one of the first stretch big men you really saw. I mean, KU's never really had a guy that's 7'1", 7'2" until Hunter Dickinson now that can step out and shoot the 3. And that was a major part of his game. And of course we saw that in the NBA too. And basically like another Dirk Nowitzki, but yeah, Rafe LaFrentz, iconic for sure.
For sure. All right. So we're getting down here to our final one. So again, in the first half of the show here, we're going to go 10 through 6. And then when we get into the back half, we're going to talk more with the top 5 and put a little bit more behind that because those guys are important. There's a reason they're top 5 on our list here. So number 6, I'm going to go with Clyde Lovelet. Now, this is way, 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 way,
Long
way
time
back.
ago.
This is in 19. He played from 49 to 52. So he was on some of those earlier Jayhawk teams. He was a part of the 1952 championship team. If you go look, tournament's most outstanding player, I don't know if you looked at his career stats. 28 points and 13 rebounds per game. That is a career line. That is not just from 1 year. 3 years he did that in a row. That is an insane stat line to average for 3 years. Played a successful NBA career, Hall of Famer in basketball overall. Lovelet was a Giannis Antetokounmpo type player before that was ever even a real thing. 28 and 13 a game, especially with Wilt Chamberlain right around the corner.
Yeah,
For
I
him
mean,
to
he
play
was
like
Wilt
that,
before Wilt.
exactly. So that's just crazy, 28 and 13. But that's why I got Lovelet at 6.
Yeah, I don't have him there, but again, you're talking about another just iconic KU player that, of course, we have to go really far back to look into, but he was a guy that dominated at that level. You know,
Mm-hmm.
he was kind of like what I know we'll get into with Wilt Chamberlain, a guy that was kind of a unicorn in that era at his size and ability. You just didn't have big guys that were that dominant at that time yet. That was kind of the early days of the league.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So who do you got at 6 then?
So my number 6, and this is the one I think I'm going to get the most heat for of my top 10. And again, I bounced him around back and forth. As I looked at legacy as a whole, he slid down a little bit for me based on the 5 guys I put ahead of him. But my number 6 is Paul Pierce. Again, easily could argue top 5, could probably even argue top 3. For me, I left him at 6 because the guys ahead of him, I think, accomplished more in their career as a whole. Super talented, one of the best, if not the best scorer KU's ever had. Again, didn't get a full career out of him. And of course, that 97 team didn't win the championship. But there's no way that you can talk KU basketball without Paul Pierce's name. Whether it's just KU specific or if you jump in NBA. I think if we sat here and did a list of former KU players that had the most successful NBA careers, I think he's top 3, but that's not what this list is. This list is our opinion of all time. Again, you can argue that he should be top 5, top 3, and I won't argue against that. It's just my opinion. The 5 guys I put ahead of him, like I said, they're all neck and neck. My 4, 5, and 6, you could easily swap around. But for me, I put Paul Pierce at 6.
Okay. So we have the old timer and Lovelet, and then the a little bit more, I guess, well, now it's not even recent, but getting closer to the Bill Self era, Roy Williams era, and Paul Pierce at 6 for you. So that's going to round out 10 through 6 for us here. Again, if you agree with us, great. If you don't, that's a-okay too, because you could do any order you want, and you could put any guys you want here on this list. You could make multiple lists of any different era, really, and just kind of pick. So that's our 10 through 6 here. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going through our top 5. Me and Keegan here are going to give you who we think are top 5 men's basketball players of all time at KU are. And again, no one and dones here. These are journeymen. This is going to be a fun top 5. So stick around, and right after the break, we'll be back here on the Hawks Nest, presented by KC Sports Company.
What up, KC? On the heels of yet another Kansas City Super Bowl victory, we have an awesome opportunity for you to broadcast your business to the local Kansas City market. We've created something called Kansas City Sports Company, which is a sports media hub for multiple live shows, all of which cover all the local Kansas City teams. Now, we have 30-second ad spots, 60-second ad spots, we have event sponsorships, studio sponsorships, show sponsorships, and much, much more. This is a great opportunity for you to start early with us and broadcast your business to a very dedicated, very enthusiastic Kansas City audience. Contact me or hit the Contact Us link on our website to learn more about this opportunity.
And welcome back into the Hawks Nest. I'm your host, Nolan Brooks. I'm here with a very special guest again, Keegan Russell from the Sports Authority podcast. First half of the show, we went through 10 through 6 of our top 10 KU men's basketball players of all time. If you agreed with it, make sure to comment. If you disagreed with it, comment as well. Give us a follow at KC Sports Company and try to tell us how bad this list might be. Whatever you want to do. Either way, it's all good stuff. So 10 through
I'll be
6,
thrilled to see the comments after this later.
I hope some of you come after us because I think maybe we need to hear it sometimes that we don't know what we're talking about. Or maybe we do. Who knows? Whatever. So 10 through 6 is done. Keegan, we're now getting into the fun part where maybe you don't want to move around some of these names, but maybe you do. Who knows? You said your 4, 5, 6 is movable, but let's get into it. The top 5 KU men's basketball players of all time. Keegan, go ahead, kick it off for us here. Who do you have at number 5?
Okay, so now time to get into it. So the player I'm about to mention is one you've already mentioned. I'm not going to dive in too much more on him because I think you said a lot on him. But my number 5 is Rafe LaFrentz. For me, he is top 5 again because he was so dominant in his stretch. He changed the way the game was played for a guy his size. He's top 5 in he's top 3 in all-time scoring list at KU. So that's definitely got to account for something. High draft pick, successful NBA career. Again, I think when you look back and go, who are the first 5? Well, maybe if you're a little bit older KU fan that's watched a lot of the 90s and 80s, I think if you go, all right, name me the first 5 mega KU players you can think of off the top of your head. I think most fans, and even not the diehards, and even those that aren't even KU fans, if I just asked a random stranger who's the 5 best players in KU basketball history, I want to say Rafe LaFrentz's name would come up because he did have a good NBA career. And so I think his name's still recognizable. So for me, I put him at 5. I think you had him at 7.
Yep.
Okay, so I had him in the 5. And again, I don't have a problem changing him around. But for me, I think he's top 5.
Okay. All right. And again, comment if you agree, comment if you disagree. I mean, again, this is such a fluid list here. But with the top 5, we tried to make it be a little bit more solidified, but again, this is very difficult. So
I think if there's one thing, I bet our top 2 is the same.
Probably. I would say so, yeah. If it's not, I'll be very surprised, and I might have you question me and tell me I'm stupid and I don't know KU, but, we'll see what happens. So number 5, I actually have your boy Nick Collison. I know you're a big Collison supporter. Collison was a part of that end of the 90s going into the 2000s era there. He did not get to, or he got 1 year with Bill Self, I believe. So
no years. It was that final season of Roy Williams. In that
final one. Okay. So he was right before Bill Self came into the picture there for KU. So what? Right? Am I on?
Yeah. His senior season was that unfortunate loss to Syracuse in the national championship, and then Roy left. And then Bill came in.
Okay, so he was a part of that last Roy Williams class there at KU, 2-time All-American, Big 12 Player of the Year in 2003, 4 years at KU, played one of the more successful careers in the NBA, a big journeyman. He was a part of that the very end of the Seattle Supersonics there, and then was with the Thunder, has his number in the rafters with the Thunder, I believe now. And he's a coach for them. So a big name in basketball in general. And he just happened to be a pretty good Jayhawk as well before made it big. So I got Collison at 5.
I love that. Collison's in my top 5 for sure. I haven't mentioned his name yet, but he's also probably my top 2 favorite player of all time. But I'll save that for another time.
For sure. Okay, so number 5 is done. Let's get to number 4 here. Who do you have at number 4.
Yep. So my number 4, again, another player you mentioned outside of your top 5. But for me, this is where I put Clyde Leveillette. I think at the time of where the game was, he was so instrumental in the success of the big man in that generation. Basically he had the stats that Wilt Chamberlain had just 5 years earlier. For me, one of the coolest things about KU is their intro videos. And if you are a big time fan and you don't get chills watching their intro videos, then you need to rethink your fandom. And in there, you see there's the old video of Clyde Leveillette walking out, and he was just so big compared to the guys around him. And he wasn't even a 7-footer yet. But I think he's just got one of the more iconic times at the peak of some of the old school rivalries, K-State and Mizzou. And there's the picture of I think it was K-State where they throw up Snob Hill and Clyde's just like pointing at it as he gets off the bus. And I don't know, for me, again, statistically, he's top 5 in scoring all time. Mostly successful NBA career, big time name. I think if you ask the older generation, they would say Clyde Leveillette has to be top 5. So again, I know you had him just outside. His career, I think, compares with that 1 through 6. I think there's a lot of comparisons, but for me, I put him at number 4.
Okay. And again, I hate sounding like a broken record, but I don't disagree with you in any way. I don't see it would be stupid of me to disagree with you because you can put these guys wherever you want. So number 4, I actually have JoJo White. So I went forward in time with Collison at 5, and now I'm going back again to the 1966 through 69 career for JoJo White. 2-time All-American, Final Four appearance in 67. 18 points a game during 3 years at KU. Successful NBA career, played with the Celtics. He was actually the main reason I started to really research more into him was from watching Glory Road, the movie Glory Road, where you see JoJo White step out of bounds against Texas Western, and it changed the whole aspect of the game. And
should have been a national championship year.
There you go. Darn Texas Western for getting the movie where he steps out of bounds, But JoJo White, just a iconic point guard from the early days of KU's successful runs there in the 60s. This is obviously kind of getting, I believe, towards the end of the Wilt Chamberlain era for KU. I think this is after the Wilt Chamberlain era. So JoJo White was another exciting guy that they brought in.
He was one I really struggled leaving him off my top 10.
Yeah.
Again, because I think he had a really good career. His statistics aren't quite there, but he didn't get a full 4-year run of playing time. He only played in 84 games. So he is basically about 30 to 40 games behind a lot of the guys that are ahead of him on these lists. So had he gotten the full 4 years, I think his statistics would rank up there. But that was the main reason I left him off. If you talk about talent alone as a guard, I think he's definitely up there. But I had a hard time putting him in above some of these other guys that just had a little bit more career success. But again, easily one you could argue is top 10, no matter who you're talking to.
Yeah, and I think the main reason I have him in there at 4 is just because of what he did in that short amount of time.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what kind of separates some of these guys is it's like, because if you do talk about the one and dones, some of them, they did a lot in that 1 year, and JoJo did a lot in 3 years. And I really, that's what's kind of put him up there for me, just the ideal point guard in the early days of KU. So, JoJo White at 4 for me. You had Clyde at 4. We are getting down to the nitty gritty here. We are into the top 3, the big 3 of KU men's basketball. So I'm actually going to go first here because I really want to sit here and listen for who you got at 3. You might need to educate me, but I have Paul Pierce at 3. You already mentioned that you could put him anywhere from 6 through 2, maybe if you wanted to. It kind of depends. But again, we talked a lot about him. NBA great. He's on a few lists for the NBA for just having successful careers overall. And then at KU, he just happened to be pretty good as well. As you mentioned, Big 12 Player of the Year, and he was a part of that 97 championship run that fell short. But the fact that he played for KU and then went on to be who he was in the NBA was great. And that's what puts him so high up for me, is the fact that he is considered a Boston Celtics great, which is tough to do on your own.
Yeah.
And he also carved out one hell of a career at KU. So he's an all-time Jayhawk, which is one of the best programs in college basketball history, if not the best, winning his team of all time. And then he did it in Boston too. So he just was too good in his time to not make top 3 for me.
Hey, I completely agree with you. He originally was my number 3, and then I switched things around a bit. And again, I have no problem with that. I think if you polled 1,000 KU fans, Paul Pierce probably falls at number 3 or 4. Again, you mentioned it with his NBA success. He's probably one of the most recognizable names in KU basketball history. So even now, as I'm sitting here talking about this, I should swap him and Rafe and put Paul up a few more spots. But I just, man, again, I will not complain that we had that wrong, because you're talking about the all-time greats. And at the end of the day, whether you have these same 6 people in a different order, to me, does not make a difference. It's just a testimony to KU's rich history of talent and success. I think Paul Pierce, I would throw him up there as if I was putting him in a top 3 outside of this, he'd be my top 3 best scorer in KU basketball history, up there with I'm assuming will be our top 2 guys. But yeah, again, no complaints here. Looking at it, I slid him down from where I had him originally because I just really liked how dominant Rafe was and Lavella, but easily could be top 3.
For sure. All right, so down to our final 2 here.
Oh, I got to do my third one.
No, wait, my bad.
Yeah, you're good.
Man, my brain is mush today. Give me your number 3. I got to hear
And
it.
you know who it is, because this is my guy, my favorite, one of my top 2 players of all time. You've already talked about him, but Nick Collison was my number 3. He is an all-time great. He's number 2 in scoring at KU. So for me, that solidified him as top 3. He played in 142 games. He was a starter from day one as a freshman, back in a time where he had to play with a guy like Drew Gooden, who was already a dominant player, but still had to play alongside of him, and they figured out how to do that. So he wasn't a true stretch 4 by any means, but that was back when you played 2 of the just dominant 5 men next to each other. And I just remember watching his highlights and going through his senior season, and I was like, there's just no guy that better fits a 4-year program player than Nick Collison. So for me, he's number 3, top 2 all-time favorite player. Statistics are definitely there. His averages were just under 15, but that senior season, he was monstrous. And unfortunately, it did not go out with a national championship like it should have been, but one heck of a career for sure.
Well, and I mean, if Collison gets a national championship, then you put him in a whole nother bracket. Top 2 scorer of all time, and you have a national championship, plus on top of that, a Player of the Year award.
Mm-hmm.
He would be in a whole nother bracket if he had a title alongside his name. So I love Nick Collison as well. I know he's your favorite. I couldn't put him at 3, but again, these are very fluid moving spots. So, but
I think my love for him is what pushed him up a couple spots.
Nothing wrong with that.
Because I did want to make him number 4 just because he was number 4. But again, my top 3, he's number 3.
Yeah. Hey, I don't disagree with you, man. One of the best Jayhawks of all time. So number 3 is done for us. So I had, of course, Paul Pierce. You have Nick Collison. We're down to our final 2 here. And I think this is where you and I are going to match up a little bit more. If we don't, please educate me. If I'm wrong here, but who you got at number 2? I don't think I'm going to be surprised here.
So if you really, as I'm sitting here about to say it, I think you could argue swapping these 2, but for me, I'm going to give you 2 and 1 back to back because it just for the sake of it's the same player. For me, Danny Manning's number 2, Wilt's number 1. Can you make an argument they could flip flop? Sure. Wilt Chamberlain's number 1, Danny's number 2.
Okay. And I'm right there with you. Danny at 2, Wilt at number 1. Danny, of course, was a part of the Miracle 1988 team. That was one of those Jayhawk teams that was not pegged to do very well, and they blew everybody away and they won the whole thing. So Danny Manning is, of course, he was a part of the Big 8 era. They weren't the Big 12 quite yet, but he was a big part of that Big 8 era, 2-time Big 8 Player of the Year, so 2 Player of the Year awards. Very rare. There's not many Jayhawks that did that, got Player of the Year twice. Now, granted, he did play his 4 years, so that gave him another opportunity, but of course, went on to be very successful in the NBA. Played a lot of primetime game basketball, and he really, in a time where KU was struggling per se, and that's a very, very light definition of struggling because they were still pretty good. A struggling era for KU managed to pretty much put them back on the map. That was where Roy Williams got recognized, or that this was where you saw them start to solidify themselves again as one of the top blue blood programs in the country, and Danny Manning is at the forefront of that. So that's why Danny's at 2, and that's why he could be at 1 because of what he did for KU.
He's definitely got the 4-year longevity. I think you could easily argue he is the most accomplished, best 4-year player by far.
Oh yeah, not even close. I think he's, if you're talking only journeyman 4-year players, then yeah, absolutely, he has to be number 1. And of course, you and I both have Wilt Chamberlain as the greatest Jayhawk ever. He's on list to be the greatest NBA player ever just because of how dominant he was. And some even, I've read so many articles and seen so many arguments that he's the greatest athlete ever.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that when you talk about Wilt Chamberlain, that they don't talk about the KU stuff at first. That's not really what you speak about. Talk about the 100-point game. You talk about what he did with the Lakers with the Jerry West run. That's what you talk about. The KU run was where it started. And if you go look at his stats, we talked about Clyde's numbers being ridiculous. Wilt one-upped him. 29 points, basically 30 points a game and 18 rebounds per game. Led the team to the tournament both years. Player of the tournament year, or player of the tournament award, 57, but no championship. And I think that's where you could kind of talk about Danny and him switching is, Wilt might have dominated everybody on the floor, but he never got a title. Danny did. And Danny did it in a year where they weren't supposed to be anywhere near the title game. And that's where you could kind of flip-flop them.
Yeah, I agree with that there. I think for me, if you take his NBA career aside, because obviously if you're in arguments for a top 5 NBA player of all time, then clearly you're the number 1 player coming out of your university. Danny is nowhere close to being compared in regard from an NBA perspective.
No.
So Wilt definitely gives the top 1. But, he did what he did in only 2 seasons. Had he done a full 4 years, he would have outpaced Danny Manning's by far. He probably could have averaged – well, if he kept that up, he basically finished – he basically finished half as many points as Danny did, just about. I think he would have surpassed 3,000. Because he had 2 seasons and he would have continued to develop and get better. But the game completely changed because of him. He was the first true legit 7-footer that had grace and skill and movement. He could do anything on the court. There were stats back then they didn't even track yet because it was so far long ago. But you're talking about games where he would average 30, 40 rebounds a game, 50 points like it was nothing on efficient shooting. There's just no one better than Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain.
Well, yeah, and if you go look at some of the highlights, and they've managed to dig up some of his KU stuff as well, and it was unfair. you could tell that he was just leaps and bounds better than everybody else and was primed for something so much more than what he did at KU. But he just happened to be really, really good as a Jayhawk. And I agree with you. If he would have played 4 years and he maintained a 30 points and 20-point rebound average, he might be the greatest college basketball player to ever live. And, that right now I would say he would be on some kind of list if he played 4 years, alongside of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, guys like that who just won in every single way in college basketball, but Wilt only played his 2 years. But then again, that's what made him so great at KU. We got him for a short amount of time back then, and he was dominant, and then he went on to great things, and he represented KU while he did that. So that you can't ask for much more out of a guy who ended up being one of the greatest athletes to ever walk the planet. So
for sure.
Wow. We've done it. I don't know how. I don't know how we've tackled a top 10 list. I mean, there's other top 10 lists that we could do. I might have to have you come back on and we could do a Bill Self era only. Because that's a whole nother list. That one's difficult on its own. So
especially because you didn't notice, most of our list did not include Bill Self guys, which is crazy to think because we've still been spoiled with tremendous talent the last 20
years. 2 national championships under Bill Self. So I don't know that we might have to do that.
Let me ask you this then. Okay. Is looking at your list now, is there anything reflecting back now that you're like, man, I should have done this? Or is there any other player that because there's someone I'm thinking of that now I'm looking at my list that I left outside of the top 10 and outside of the next 5 that again could easily argue as a top 10 player. But is there before I tell you mine, is there anything like that you're thinking?
The only one. No, I don't think I'd change anybody.
So for me, I was going through earlier and looking at all-time stats lists, and I think he is an all-time great. It's a matter of longevity in this case, but Bud Stallworth. Looking back, I'm like, dang, how did I leave him off? Because he only had a couple seasons and only played in 82 games, but he still scored almost 1,500 points, averaged 18 a game. One of the best scorers KU's ever had. He's probably for sure top 5 best scorer. But yeah, just looking back now, I'm like, man, he didn't even crack my top 15. And, some lists have him in the top 20, some top 25. But again, I think he's another guy you could argue deserves to be on this list. Just as I'm putting this together, it's just so hard because for every person you add in, you have to take somebody out.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. Well, again, we've done it. We've conquered the top 10 men's basketball players of all time from the University of Kansas. Keegan, thank you so much for coming on the show and tackling one of the most difficult homework assignments you probably ever had in your life. But thank you again for coming on the show to tackle this with me.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll be doing some more. Hopefully by next week, you guys can check out some of my podcasts. We'll be coming on the network next week. You can search for us already. We're at KCSA Pod or KC Sports Authority. We've been doing it for about a year, but we are now merging with KC Sports Co. So you'll be able to check us out on this platform next week, and we'll start getting into some of that stuff. But yeah, this was a lot of fun. Again, super hard list to do, but a lot of fun because we just get to sit here and talk about the rich history KU basketball has, and there's just nothing that compares to it.
Well, absolutely. So that's going to do it for us here on the Hawks Nest. I'm your host, Nolan Brooks. Again, thank you, Keegan Russell, for coming on from the KC Sports Authority. And this has been a fun show. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. Tell us if we're wrong. Tell us if we're right. Tell us if we're crazy. Maybe we need to rethink our lives as far as KU fans, whatever it is. All good stuff. Make sure to tune back in next week. Thank you for tuning into the Hawks Nest right here on KC Sports Company.